Good afternoon, everybody. Today's Thursday, April 24th, 2025. It's 3 p.m. We're in City Hall, room 244, and I call the City Commission special meeting to order. Commissioners present are Commissioner Duval, Commissioner Langdon, Mayor Stokes, Vice Mayor Emmerich, and Commissioner Pesaro. Quorum present for the meeting. Also present, City Manager Fletcher, Assistant City Attorney Coughlin, Police Chief Garrison, and who do we have from Fire? Oh, and Fire Chief Titus. Let's see, Kim, do us the honor.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Assistant City Clerk, any public comments?
Yes, sir. We do have a couple e-comments.
Okay.
Debbie McDowell, it is very discouraging when the original agenda posts and it doesn't include all the necessary backup materials, only to have the agenda amended a few days later. This agenda has one topic, a very important topic. There wasn't anything in the backup when the agenda posted last week. Yes, it was amended Monday, but that's not the point. Missing backup materials and amending agendas is becoming the norm rather than the exception. This isn't very transparent. Also, the final report of PFM study isn't included in the backup. My public records request came back as no responsive document when I asked for it. Why isn't it available? PFM's report should be 100% available and in the backup materials. Otherwise, why are you discussing this today? For what it's worth, this is the third time a final study wasn't available at the time of discussion. Only their PowerPoint presentation. A PowerPoint is not a final report. A final report gives a higher level of details compared to a PowerPoint slide presentation. Next public comment, Hayward from many manuscripts of antiquity. And that is all for e-comments. If we did have any comments from the public audience, I didn't receive any cards. Any comments from the, no? Okay, that is all, Mayor.
Thank you, sir. On to general business, one item, 25-2193, discussion and possible action regarding the capital improvement plan and funding model prepared by PFM Financial Advisors. City Manager, care to introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So if you recall, this is the final item that we discussed that we would bring back to the commission for your decision-making opportunities and information on the financial side of what we've been doing. Just about a year ago, as of yesterday, is when the decision and direction was given. There were three different reports. One was a fiscal condition analysis, one was an economic development analysis, and this third leg is the CIP, the Capital Improvement Project report. The goal of the report was to capture the entire universe of capital improvement needs. Our staff had presented and compiled a version of, I think, a 15-year outlook, which was like maybe $1.9 billion at the time. And not having that sort of scrubbed through all the departments and by our expert to make sure that we were going in the right direction was extremely important. So this document and what our PFM advisor, Mr. Jeremy Neufeld, is going to walk you through is going to show you the results of that action and how those projects fall into the different departments of the city of Northport. Once he finishes and you are asking your questions, we'll talk about how do we take the next step of how do we approach the moving forward with those projects and letting the public know the plans of how they will factor into those decisions as well. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Jeremy Neufeld. I think he's going to walk us through a PowerPoint and information, and then we can go from there.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Pleasure to be back here in front of the group. We've been talking about this for a year. I didn't realize it had been a year, but this is sort of the outcome of the model that was prepared. The focus point for us was to layer in, some of the work that was done by the real estate consulting group and combine that with capital improvement needs that are upcoming and required to facilitate the growth that is being projected. So we're going to do a quick recap of a couple of the discussions we've had previously, move through the overview of the CIP, talk through some debt management and financing options, and then happy to take questions. And even along the way, I think it'd be all right to interrupt or stop if there were some questions on a particular slide. So with that, I'll move through the agenda. So as you all know, there is a pretty extensive presentation that went through the various assumptions for absorption and development growth and land use planning that's been a focus point of ours. This is the future land use map that was used with the activity centers and things listed here. The scenarios that were developed and analyzed, was essentially a range of scenarios 1, 2, and 3 from a conservative to an aggressive approach, and we settled on a range of these scenarios just to show the separation, and it is dependent on how the absorption is actually realized over time. So it's a living model. It's a model that's designed to be updated periodically, probably not annually, but every 2 or 3 years, however often it makes sense to take a look at it. And we also have a 20-year CIP built into the model just to show how those infrastructure needs could be layered in over time. So the two major impacts we look at are fiscal impacts. Those are the things that staff is primarily concerned with. And then economic impacts are the things that happen in and around the community to include job growth and that type of thing. So fiscal impacts are the things, revenues, taxes, as well as infrastructure needs and costs. Economic impacts are the jobs, wages, and output of production for the community. So the fiscal impact is really the challenge of a CIP, because you have to put infrastructure in place to support development and growth and that future land use. Those impacts will eventually result in revenues, in tax revenues, sales tax revenues, other revenues down the road. But oftentimes those needs are required ahead of receiving those revenues. All the things listed here, everything from essential services to services that are provided to the community, are funded through this growth. And there will be significant property tax revenue. You can see here, taxable value development, from 8 million to well over 30 in the forecast here. So that's kind of the way the growth picture looks. That growth will be determined by the absorption of development and the ability for folks to capitalize on their investment in property here. So the existing projection, was a much slower model. There's been huge demand to the area to accelerate the development. The ULDC, recognizes that and essentially gets to a much more significant revenue impact, which is the good part. The bad part's the CIP and the cost of facilitating that growth. These are the different, the different economic impacts. So the economic impacts are direct. Those can be, things that are a direct result of the people in the community. Indirect effect are business-to-business relationships and folks that benefit from that development. And then the induced effect is, essentially just wealth and income to the area. And this is the overlay of how these economic impacts, benefit the community. Economic impacts is typically what a developer would focus on. And again, fiscal impacts are typically the things that staff focuses on. So the 20-year CIP is a long-range CIP. Typically, we would plan for a 5. We would have 10 in scope, and 20 would be just making sure we're staying ahead of what's coming down the pipe. $2.5 billion is a massive capital project need. That's supported by growth in revenues that are anticipated and projected based on the ULDC. And you can see here that by department, the range is between 20 and 860 million. So a lot of road drainage work, that's a significant need across the state. Public Works has solid waste fleet, fire rescue has significant needs, and clearly the police and the water, wastewater utilities have significant needs as well.
I have a question on
Sure.
this slide real quick.
Sure.
As I was looking through this last night, under solid waste, where it says 2026, you're looking at 1,000,007, but then in 2027, it jumps to 16. I believe, I can't see that far away, but 60 million, is that incorporating the possible building of the transfer station? Why does it jump that high?
Yeah, so it goes from 1,725,000 in 26 to 16.7 million in 2027. And I think we have an answer coming.
I apologize.
That's what it is, brother.
That's what I'm assuming. I just want that on the record because I'm assuming it's the same with fire down there with their amenities as well for 2027.
What drives? Yes, please.
So in detail, it's the solid waste transfer station phase 2. I can't speak in terms of what exactly that phase 2 means, but that's what drives a 15 million cost in fiscal year 27.
Right, that's what I figured. I just wanted to make sure for the record and for the citizens out there, when you see these big jumps, that, especially when it comes to solid waste, we're discussing with the referendum and everything about the transfer station. So when I see that up there, I wanted to ask about it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's just a pony on that. This list, or the list of capital projects that are included in this total number here include everything in the kitchen sink. This includes, I'm assuming, correct me if I'm wrong, everything that might be on a CIP sheets that we've looked at over the years, all the surtax projects that are on the surtax list. It includes the 3 referendum projects, the police headquarters, the solid waste transfer station, the wastewater treatment improvements. Everything's in here. There is nothing, am I correct, nothing of a capital project nature that is not in this, that we know of right now.
I was gonna say that we know.
That we know of right now. Everything's in here.
Correct. This is the
Yeah,
universal
I just
projects
wanted
that we
that so
know.
everyone understands, because, typically, historically, we've looked at our CIP book, and then we've had surtax over here. This is the total package. Perfect.
Can we allow Public Works to maybe expand on the answer from finance regarding the difference in that number? Did you hear the question, Chuck?
It was relayed to me, you asked about why it was 16 and 27.
Yes,
That's for construction.
okay,
So we have design prior to that.
which I understand. I just wanted to make sure that it was hooked up with the transfer station and the building thereof.
Yes, sir.
That's
What that number is.
That's what I wanted to make sure that the public knew on why it jumped from 2 million to 16 million in 1 year. Where's that money coming from? Where's it going? Because they're seeing these numbers, but they don't have any, definitions on why these numbers are changing. So,
That's the actual year of construction for the transfer station.
thank you very much.
Right. So the 5-year needs are significant. 575 is potentially what the city is planning for over the next 5 years. So this is a little more, there's better visibility on these projects. These are projects that are in some sort of a planning mode. Just wanted to break them out here separately.
I got a question, quick question for you. Under the police, Fly 26, 27, 28, 29, they all have an amount in there, which I'm assuming is a debt service number for the police headquarters. Why is it jumping to 19 million in 2030? Isn't there, either there's something else over and above that, another roughly $10 million?
That's good.
Chief Todd Garrison for the police department. That's gonna be for the, public safety training complex that's in the CIP program.
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, probably could have found that if I looked in the actual details, sorry about that. Gotcha. Okay.
Way to go, man.
Hey, look, nobody's perfect.
And this just provides a census to, by department where the focus is in the capital program. So, this has been, the main focus of discussion. How do we fund, these priorities? So currently up for referendum is a police department headquarters project, a solid waste transfer station, and a wastewater treatment facility. Those projects are described here, and, those are up for approval next month. These are summary details that show just kind of estimates on annual debt service for funding of these projects. Geo bonds would be used to do the police headquarters building. Annual debt service would be about $7 million for that project. Solid waste, that would be solid waste revenue, so that's specific to that fund. That would be about $815,000 a year. And then utility system, that would be about $1 million paid from wastewater treatment revenues.
Why is the NTE, for the geo bonds for police with 150 instead of 115?
Yeah, so that's a not to exceed, that's just what, it's approved to go up to.
Actually, it's not.
It's not, is that a typo?
115 is
It's
the not to
115?
exceed.
Okay.
That's why it doesn't really matter that much, but people are gonna pick up on it and wonder, wait a minute, how come this $115 million police headquarters that
Yeah.
we're supposed to vote on is 150?
My apologies. Yeah, that's a typo.
But it's 115, that is the number, it's a not to exceed number, the 150 doesn't matter, and even if the 6699 as an average annual needs to be tweaked down, the purpose of this analysis is to see how the projects lay in, and so, that easily can be fixed.
Yeah, the debt service bond is right. So there's no way we'd get 150 million for 7 million, but,
Exactly.
no, thank you for pointing that out. Apologies. Current strategy at the moment, since there was a failed referendum to allow for general borrowing, ability, is to bring projects up periodically every 2-3 years or as needed, when priority projects have been identified. And the affordability has been determined or identified. So revenue source must be found to pay for the debt service. That's, that's just a known in budget capacity. And staff, of course, would manage the debt portfolio in accordance with the debt policy that was approved, late last year. Right now, referendum vote is required for the issuance of debt. That's been the challenge here in getting some of these infrastructure needs addressed, is that it must go to a referendum vote. If it's not achieved, there are other alternatives to bringing financing into place to fund these priority projects. Primarily, there's 3 types that we would consider. And we would advise on certificates of participation, which is a leaseback structure that carries with it a slight price penalty in the market, so it would not be rated as high as the city's general obligation debt. A public-private partnership would be another alternative. That's technically under alternative finance strategies, because that is typically a developer-driven process. Those are oftentimes done as leases, so that would be a significantly higher cost. That would be compared to owning a house, you would be leasing a house. So that's the structure for certificates of participation, that you would own it eventually. The public-private partnership is more of a structure where you would never take ownership in that asset. You would simply have the rights to use the asset. And then privatization is something that you would look at if you wanted to unload the risk of maintaining and managing an asset such as a utility. That gives the rate setting ability to a private company for a private company to manage and to execute on growth and development needs for infrastructure. Oftentimes that's significantly higher expense and that's something that the city would have limited control over if they sold the assets.
Or when you referred in the slide to the financing alternatives, are you primarily looking at the financing alternatives for the three infrastructure projects that are on the referendum? I mean,
Yes.
These financing alternatives may lend themselves to other projects on the CIP list, but this slide is directed towards those referendum items.
It is, there's gonna
As
be
alternatives.
instances where privatization, wouldn't be an option. There are certain assets that the city would not be able to release themselves of. The public-private partnership, that is something that, you can, get a jail facility, for example, developed and built with private funds and then have no ownership in the asset, no maintenance requirements. But essentially, all that gets put into a payment, a lease payment or a rent payment to occupy the facility.
See, the reason I asked the question is these three alternatives certainly lend themselves to the three referendum items we have coming up for vote right now. But there's more financing alternatives available for addressing this entire project, CIP project list. There's a lot more, in fact. There's surtax, there's district and enterprise funds, there's grants, there's developer funding of projects. And the reason I bring those up is it's important for people to realize when it's pretty sobering to look at $2.5 billion and go, how can we ever borrow the money to be able to pay for all these projects, even over a quarter to a half a century? It's not that way. The truth is, many of these projects, significant number of these projects, get serviced, get paid for, get financed through these other methodologies that we've been doing all along for 65 bloody years. So when we look at how eventually we take this report you just gave us and carry it into the future as a tool for us to work on, there are more funding alternatives. So I wouldn't want the public to get the wrong idea here that like $2.5 billion has got to be borrowed for, because that's just not the case. And we'll talk about that more when you finish. I didn't mean to
No,
go off
it's-
on the tangent, but it's important to say now because you were talking about the
Yeah,
alternatives.
no, I appreciate you pointing that out. I think that'll always be a charge of, city staff to find efficient ways of leveraging, the dollars. So grant writing and, looking at SRF opportunities and all that.
All kinds of ways. and
All
stuff.
different ways, right? Yep. As discussed, each alternative delivery option, comes with it a cost. A lot of times these are options that are, considered because it unloads some sort of risk that the city would want to offload. So, it's not necessarily that these are bad options, it's just compared to how traditional, municipal government would finance, these types of projects, it would be more expensive. So, I think I always oversimplify the reason why we borrow. You borrow because, the money that you're gonna use to pay for the asset that you're benefiting from and enjoying, is not gonna be available until down the road. So, so for large capital projects, we've seen this over the last 5 years, a significant inflation impact to budgets and what it costs to get certain projects completed. There's ratepayer equity. The idea of pay-go funding for certain priorities works in the instance when it's a stadium and you put a tax in place for 2 years and the stadium's there and it benefits the community forever. you know, it doesn't really work that way for utilities and for solid waste groups and for things that are gonna benefit for decades into the future, when those revenues aren't available today. You know, refunding for debt service savings and restructuring is something that, you know, the city has taken advantage of over the past several years. We've brought refunding opportunities to lower the cost and make your debt portfolio efficient. And borrowing rates are, you know, pretty low. I mean, right now, a borrowing for the city would be about 4%. That's significantly lower than what a developer finance project would be, about half, you know, what that would be in an efficient market. So locking in current rates while taking inflation risk off the table and allowing for current and future ratepayers and citizens to appreciate the benefits of an asset is really what drives the decision to borrow. One thing that, you know, we can't lose sight of is the ability for the city to function and manage through emergencies. You know, this area's been impacted severely and consistently. The one thing we know is there will be another hurricane, there will be another storm event. These are massive events that require sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars to get through, and then several years to realize the repayment from FEMA and other sources. So that's something that really would hamstring the city if there were an event that would require massive capital needs to clear debris in particular, but then there's the safety and security aspect as well that the city is charged with maintaining. So we spent a lot of time going through the debt policy and why we have it in place. I think there's two primary benefits to a debt policy. It allows elected officials, you know, a framework to operate within and make decisions and set policy on. And it also allows the constituents to understand that there are guidelines and rules that will govern how those decisions are made. It'll improve the decision making. It'll provide rational thought processes that go into it, and it'll develop some consistent reporting on the city's financial metrics and in a way that we can balance growth and the capital improvement impact on the city's revenues. So we've set up for an annual report through the debt management policy, and also in a good governance, a periodic update and review of that policy. So every 5 years, there will be new things that change in the market, new things that change with the city, and new priorities that need to be factored in. So that'll be something that evolves over time. These are sort of, you know, when we sat down, looked at the debt policy objectives, this is what we wanted to focus on. Fiscal sustainability, debt affordability, transparency and accountability with compliance reporting, efficient debt structuring and appropriateness, you know, the use of debt instruments and what is good practice and best practice. You know, our focus is you know, to preserve and enhance the creditworthiness of the city to be able to access the capital markets in a way that provides confidence to investors, rating agencies, and other stakeholders. Supporting capital improvement projects in a way that's you know, managed over time, and certainly, you know, finance is concerned about regulatory compliance and staying within the bounds of tax exempt law. These are the metrics that were approved, and this was, you know, based on a broad sampling of debt policies for other you know, like issuers in the state that have more flexibility to issue debt. So some of these are very aggressive to the conservative nature of how the city would issue debt. So this is something that will change over time, and you know, maybe there needs to be more conservative targets over time, depending on, you know, what the initiatives are and what the future capital needs are. But this is based on best practice and comparable debt management policies. So this table just kind of shows you where you're at, you know, with those parameters. You're clearly well above, you know, in the special district. You know, your coverage is well above the target. So there is significant capacity to issue debt, under the rules of the debt management policy. There's also currently very little debt, on the books with the city.
Questions, commissioners? Wanna go around? You gotta raise your hands, we don't have a, so, city manager?
May I interject some other information before you start your conversation, Mr. Mayor?
Absolutely.
The first thing I want to say is, the consultant was procured to examine our city's capital and infrastructure needs and present a CIP funding model. So that's what they did. They were not commissioned to create a report, as you may have heard in that comment earlier. That wasn't the exercise. And you have now received a 150-plus line item that was attached to the document that shows you the detail of the funding model. It doesn't get any more detailed than that, and it doesn't get any more transparent than that. And when someone says that you're not being transparent because you didn't include it in the original agenda item, that's a matter of timeliness, not transparency. So knowing that we had to get this information to you in a way that you could use during our budget process, and prior to what we had heard from other citizens say, well, how do those three projects fit into the overall universe of your CIP needs? That is why we gave it to you when we gave it to you. Now, in the future, I know you're not a shy mayor, but if you would like something in a different format or a different time, you will let us know. But our goal is always to make sure that you have the right information when you need it and stick to our guideline, our timelines as much as possible. That's what we're always going to commit to you. The funding alternatives, you know, I thought he did a good job of sharing what's out there. I think that since we've talked about this $2 billion number in the past, our citizens may think that that's all gonna fall down on them at one point in time, and that's not actually true. The purpose of today is to sort of get us all to understand that with a number that large and projects that many, we must take multiple different pathways in order to get it done, and we will communicate and bring them along with us the entire way. And in my mind, I think one of the next steps that you as a board are gonna ask for is to sort of break down where some of the financing options that we believe some of those will come from. It could be labeled referendum, CIP, it could be labeled, you know, there's multiple grants, there's multiple different options. None of that is sort of tied to that number yet. But as we tie it to it, there has to be some sort of systematic structure where we say, we don't want to hold special elections for projects unless we absolutely have to. So then you need to be on a 2-year rotation of what you can afford, what you can ask for, the UODC money that comes in, as Mr. Newfield talked about as well, and how does all that roll into you achieving the needs for the citizens? And I think that that is going to be a very long process, and I think that we're starting off on the journey the right way. And the last thing I'll say, Mr. Mayor, is that I can't stress enough that the inclusion of the citizens in the debt management policy has to be there, because that's what we heard. We heard that they want to make sure that we don't overexert our credit, we don't have debt limits that we can't adhere to, and all those conversations are going to become regular new conversations as we go forward for multiple years. I mean, this is really going to change how we look at debt going forward and how do we take care of the city going forward. And I don't want that to be lost on the information that we're sharing today.
Thank you, sir. Let's start, wanna go around the room, Commissioner Duval?
I don't have a question, basically, you know, a comment, and it's, you know, basically what our city manager was just speaking of, and it was on the last amount of slides, and that's that we do maintain that good credit rating, okay? That we do our borrowing when we need it, the right type of borrowing, and that we don't overextend ourselves, so that, you know, the city does have an excellent credit rating. You know, it would be wonderful if we could get to that AAA, but I'll accept AA. But that's the main thing is, you know, and as Mr. Fletcher just mentioned, to keep paying attention to this as we go through the next few years, you know? To do this now and then wait another 20 years before we do it again, that's not acceptable. That's all I've got, folks. Thank you.
Mr. Langdon?
Thank you, Mayor. As city manager and I were discussing during our one-on-one, and perhaps this would be a next step, is to, for each of the CIP projects on this list, to identify an anticipated primary and secondary funding source. Because I think that will help us sort of focus in on what projects can be accommodated through impact fees and/or surtax and/or operating revenue, whatever, versus those that we may have to consider bonds or COPS or whatever. So I know Mayor said it, and I really want to reiterate it. The community should not think we're going to be looking to borrow $2.5 billion over the next 20 years. We have a variety of ways of funding things. And in our individual CIP projects, which we will see during the budget cycle, those potential funding sources will be identified. I think it's helpful, though, for the community and for me, at sort of this high level, to be able to focus in on how we anticipate funding these various projects.
And we also talked about maybe expanding our view from a 5-year CIP to a 10-year CIP. Something that keeps us in connection with the projects a little closer so that people will know a little earlier, and we know that the further out you look, the less reliable it is, but I think that it could provide value to the citizens since we're putting all of this out here right now. There's never been a number this big probably in the city of Northport's history. So we got to be careful that we manage it well in the messaging and how we communicate it so that everyone knows the right things when they should know it.
And one other point that I hope the community would understand, if something major in the city breaks, these projects are going to go through a reshuffling process because something else may bubble up as a higher priority. I'm done.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, and what you had brought up about referendums and stuff like that down the road and not wanting to use them. That's why I say we put the task at hand to where we review our CIP projects to where it would be every 2 or every 4 years on a scheduling to where if we see that need, then we just put it on a regular election.
Yes, sir.
And not have to worry about special elections. I understand the reasoning why we're doing it now because of the needs and everything. But down the road, as we plan this and with what Commissioner Langdon had said with the different funding sources, are we gonna be able to accomplish it or not? Do we have to go out for bonds? Do we have to get permission to borrow? And it can be scheduled rather than, halfied along the way,
Yes, sir.
so.
There might be things we just don't do.
Right. But I'm just saying, it could be on a schedule to where it's, people can expect it, okay, what referendum are we looking at this election cycle? Nothing right now, but in the future, we would have some. That's all I have, Mayor.
Mr. Petro?
Well, a couple of things. I have a question on the slide 13. That slide does not include the debt service amounts or estimated amounts. Or is it just anticipated?
So this is a summary of the projects, that have been identified.
And no debt service is included?
Is
or
it in the numbers, right?
It's included. Yes, it's included.
That's
That service for those 3 projects,
the
yes,
3.
it's included.
Oh, for those just
Yes.
3 projects?
Just those 3.
It's just those 3.
And what about inflation or cost rising? Is that included in any of those projects or those 3 projects?
When we asked departments to do projections, that was part of the exercise that you would, include the inflation in your estimates.
As much as you could.
As much as you could,
Right, as
yes,
much as you could.
yes.
It's definitely not
It's
exact
what we
science.
know
Check that
now,
out.
right?
Right.
Things might
Years and years
change.
in the future.
projects might get reprioritized, amounts might need to be reevaluated. This is what we know now, or at the time when it was put together.
And I also just want to make it clear for the public, and I get this question a lot, especially for the emergency borrowing question. And this question is more for finance, I guess. They ask, well, you're gonna have unlimited amount of borrowing authority. I don't think it's true. Can you relate to that and substantiate there's a limit of all of us what we can borrow, right, as individuals?
Absolutely.
It's same applies to the city.
Absolutely.
To what criteria the city falls under?
And we set those pretty robust limits in our debt policy. We will manage those annually and make sure we don't exceed those. In addition, no one has capacity to borrow. We don't have lending capacity. Nobody will lend us that much money to exceed our ability to save, comfortably pay it back, if that is a very simple explanation of it, that Jeremy could give a much better, but nobody can borrow endless amounts of money, even a city.
Yeah, and just an example, when a hurricane hits, there's initial assessments and initial costs and there's, 30 days, 90 days, there's all these time frames you gotta hit for FEMA reimbursement eligible projects. So, typically there's an emergency funding approval, through resolution, and then you would take pieces as you needed. Bay County, for example, they approved $300 million of funding after Hurricane Michael. It took them a couple of years to ramp up to that amount of borrowing, but the bank was very involved in the credit discussion and the timeliness of the FEMA reimbursements and the ability to cover interest payments. And then at the end of the day, what's the solution for what's left? And so programs like that was in 2018. They still have $100 million outstanding, and they're still working through that. At the end of the day, you're going to have a fix out, and there's going to be a burden on the taxpayers for whatever that fix out is. But over that 4, 5, 6 year period after the event, you're essentially doing triage to get funding in place so it doesn't impact your ability to deliver services on your normal basis. But there is a limit to how much a bank is going to be willing to extend the city.
Sure, and it does make sense because you gotta service that debt. And if we cannot service as a city that debt, we cannot borrow more than we can borrow. So I just wanna make it clear for the public because some of them think we can borrow unlimited amount of money and go on a shopping spree. I mean, and it's only for one of the referendum questions, it only applies to that emergency situation. So.
Yeah, no, it's a nuanced discussion that finance has with banks when we go through that process, or with investors when we're taking a bond transaction to the market. But a AA credit requires an 800 credit score would be probably a AA minus or an A plus. So AA credit, there's a significant amount of focus on those metrics and how you're going to afford the debt service payments and still do all the things that you're charged with doing.
And also, the last question I have, on the summary of 20-year CIP, is there any inclusion of conversion from private well and septic to public, or this item was not included? Conversion,
It's all in there.
maybe I missed it.
I can answer that. Sue Gracefield, Assistant Director of Utilities. There is a line item there for the neighborhood expansion. It is named wastewater expansion. It includes the water and wastewater expansion into the neighborhoods. It's under, it's under utility wastewater systems, the second from the last project there. It says water/wastewater line extensions.
Could you tell which slide that you're looking at?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's on the 20-year projection
20 year.
slide that you were just looking at.
So it's in the
Line
attachment that
133.
has all of the details.
Okay.
The slides are a summary of those, but if you look at the attachment and you
Just looking at
scroll
the
down
slide.
under utility wastewater systems. Okay.
She's referring back to the 150 line item document that was attached in the back that I was referencing.
Okay, okay.
That's the detail that she's saying is in there, to answer your question.
That's all.
I'll second, Commissioner. All right, quick question. Question for you. In preparing the 4 sheets that lay out project by project, how were, I mean, I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, these projects, each department came up with their wants and their needs. They presented them. They were scheduled out. What was the criteria used, if any, for how they were timelined over the 25 years? I mean, was there, what, how was it determined? Or what thought process went into that?
I think that was up to our directors and their expertise in knowing what we're gonna need and when. And yes, they put those in the timing when we will need those.
Because, one thing, first of all, I want to say, this was long overdue, and perhaps there was maybe a public perception about what this report might do for us as a city. Whether it's anything from a nothing burger to a silver bullet that's gonna all of a sudden explain how all these projects are gonna get done. This is a tool. This was the attempt to finally wrap our arms around a couple of $1 billion worth of projects that were hither, thither, and yon in the way we tracked them and accounted for them or listed them. We had surtax lists, we have CIP lists, we have a notebook, and you go page by page every budget year, and this puts it on to 4 pages that lists them, that schedules them out. It doesn't prioritize them. It doesn't talk about how they're going to be paid for. It's an attempt to say, this is the master list. And as I alluded to earlier, and Commissioner Langdon referenced, there really are a ton of ways in which you think about for 65 years, without borrowing capability, it's not like no projects were ever done. And every year when the budget process takes place, first of all, we got, on our 4th rendition of surtax, so there's, in this 15-year bucket, approximating $400 million worth of surtax. Now, a big chunk of it's obviously going to Price Boulevard, but there are surtax projects in these schedules that are allocated to be funded and paid for by surtax. Our district and enterprise funds, since we didn't have borrowing ability, within their budgeting processes provide for financial resources in their budgeting to help pay for these, a series of projects. And there have been many of them. A lot of the water structures, some of the other things we do, we bill out our usage, and part of it is a reserve for capital improvements. And that's the only way we've had to really fund this stuff without going to public referendum. Then there's grants, which we have gotten better and better at going after. And even in this skitsy kind of climate in Tallahassee and at the federal level, those things cycle out. And while we've had a tight year or two, in time, things loosen up, they tighten up, they loosen up again. So there's grants that are going to help support many of these projects. And then there's the other gigantic one that we don't always make people understand, but it's out there and people see it. The Welland Park development never would be a reality were it not for developer funding. The water plants, all the infrastructure, the safety building, hundreds of millions of dollars that were outlaid by developers who saw an opportunity to make money by being a part of our city, made investments. Some, probably not nearly all, of those investments will find their way back to them in impact fee payments over the years. But they're a tremendous source of funding. As we look out east, as we look out towards our farm areas and Toledo Blade and in the Innovation Corridor, there are projects that run the gamut from parks and rec projects to infrastructure projects, to utility projects, road projects, that'll help be funded by these developers. And by having this and identifying which projects lend themselves to that, it will give us the tools to, as we negotiate with these developers, to see to it that that's on the table. These are projects that they have to pony up for if they want to be a part of our city and work with our city. And they will, because they can make money in spite of the investments they have to make. So there's that. And then, of course, we get to the basic borrowing ability, which is pretty darn limited, as Commissioner Petrov said. You know, we have funding formulas. We only have the ability to service so much debt. These three projects that are on the referendums are pretty much going to handle us for a bit of time. And we got some grants in the pipeline. You know, people have alluded to, Jesus, 2 years ago, not even, we talked about all the water structures that were a big problem in the city, and those were our priorities. And by God, now all of a sudden we're talking about a police headquarters and a wastewater treatment plant and a solid waste. And like, what happened to those? Well, gee whiz, we found the money to do it. We got grants, we got SRQ money. You know, we don't live in a bubble here. We're not off the rails. We actually figured out how to do a lot of this stuff. So we've got the pipeline pretty much filled on some of these water structures and bridges for a little while. Price Boulevard's starting to be widened now. That's going to take care of a big bulk of the surtax money for quite a bit of time. There's, you know, some of these projects that, you know, our normal district and enterprise funds are going to service right along. So, you know, what are we going to borrow? Hopefully, we're going to be able to issue the bonds for these three projects and manage our citizens' tax dollars in the most efficient way to pay for them. The rest of these projects, as you look at them, you know, the timelines may shift. New methodologies may come about. As our previous PFM report showed a ramping up of revenues from development and ULDC rewrites, we'll start to see that bigger spread. If we keep our costs of running this city tight, we'll start to see the ability to service more debt. How the hell, excuse me, I'm sorry. Let me take this call.
The golden buzzer.
And,
Next.
Anyway, jeez, peasy. And we'll find a way to additionally do two things. One, be able to support perhaps a greater degree of debt, and to see that cap move a little bit when you have the ability to do it and yet stay within our funding formulas. Plus, we'll be paying stuff down. You take a police headquarters. We were told by our state and county people, you gotta have your funding in place in order to even be able to come and ask for some of the grant monies to do this. If we can chip away at that building at a $5 million a year clip over the next 4, 5, 6 years, we have the ability to pay that project down, which is freeing up our ability to move on to some of these other projects as the need arises. So, you know, frankly, I thought this was a great first step. It was a long time coming. I hope people didn't overestimate or over-anticipate what all this would be, but it is a great first tool. You know, 3.5 years ago when our city manager presented, you know, performance-based budgeting, that was a really new thing. And we created pillars in this city. We created priorities under those pillars. We drive our budget dollars towards achieving those highest priorities. And utilizing these tools to help guide the capital projects as we move forward is really starting to package the whole deal and give us the ability to plan 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years out. This roadmap, this guideline, this is not just for us. It's really for future commissions and future leaders in the city, both staff and elected, to work with, to use as a roadmap and a design going forward so we can stay on track, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every few years, and we can pass the batons off and keep this thing moving. Because while it's gonna be a great thing to put a shovel in the ground this week for Price Boulevard widening, no one should forget that that project should live in infamy as what not to do. And I wouldn't say that in my public comments because, you know, I think it's an upbeat conversation to have. But we should never forget that a $5-7 million project became 80. We can never, and future commissions can never let that happen again. We just can't. So thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Kim, and your people, and everyone who helped put this together, because it's a good first step. And with that, unless the vice mayor has something more to say, anybody has something more to say, Commissioner DeVal.
Yeah, that's, I just, you know, for Demetrius,
You are now Demetrius.
when we talk to people, to, you know, when people ask those questions about, you know, how much are we gonna borrow? You know, what they're talking about is, okay, how much in taxes are we gonna pay? Okay, but I look at it, I always try to simplify things. I look at it as, we have 4 safeguards. Number one, the banks are only gonna let us borrow so much money. Number 2, the debt management policy is also gonna help us. That's a guardrail. That AA rating, okay? These eyes are gonna be watching that rating. If that rating drops, okay, it's gonna say, hey, no more borrowing, okay, until that rating goes back up. And the last thing is, people like me, I'm not gonna be here forever, okay? But the commission is gonna look at things and say, hey, we start losing that rating, banks are saying we're charging us interest rates. I trust the commission's gonna say, let's put a timeout on borrowing. But to make those, you know, 4 factors known to the public, that, you know, there are safeguards in place.
City manager, you know, you alluded to it, and, you know, this is a first step. This report helps lay the groundwork that, you know, the next step, I'm assuming would be to start to take this and start working with staff to develop options, as Commissioner Langdon says, breaking these down the first 5 years, say, to start to say, you know, where are the potential revenue sources to handle these various projects? Which ones can we do, which ones can't we do, where they are, how they're gonna be done. Remembering each year we do our strategic planning, we revise and tweak our priorities, and all that comes together. So when you say here, I mean, we talk about an economic development study and financial condition analysis. Am I assuming that that's kind of what that would entail?
Well, those are,
What did you have in mind?
the economic development analysis and the fiscal condition analysis are reports you've already received. So we've already discussed those. Those were the first 2 that you received before the end of the calendar year last year. We owed those to you before the end of December 31st, and you've gotten those. Now, the highlight of those is the UODC rewrite and the $30 million that'll come in and help alter the picture that we're talking about with the CIP. Our very next step should be to put in alignment this 20-year outlook with our 5-year outlook in the CIP conversation that you as a board will vote on, and add it out for 10 years. And then also sort of in those first 10 years, try to identify which funds we believe at the time could be primary or secondary funding sources for these projects. If we do that and we keep that as a focus annually, then all we've done is sort of baked into our normal process more detail and data so that there's less questions later. One of the things that we all might remember is someone saying, I didn't know you needed a new police headquarters. I've never heard of this. This is the first time. And if we do a better job with our CRP design and conversation, no one will be able to say that, oh, we knew they needed it and they always told us they didn't have the money. Or we knew they needed it and it was a large-scale infrastructure project and they couldn't fit in this surtax. There's things that hopefully we're growing from and not repeating from as we try to stay more on top of and better inform our citizens. So you're gonna see this evolve in the upcoming weeks as we sit in front of you, and then you'll be able to point back and say, oh yeah, I remember that, and now I see how A ties to this and B ties to that.
Because that's kind of how I see it. I mean, you know, come the 13th, we're going to know pretty much where we stand on the three projects we're asking for bond borrowing authority on. And then, you know, we can sort of, you know, if they pass, good. If they don't, we have to pivot to some other financial options. And as we put this budget together for this upcoming year, we'll start to work this 2025-26 group of projects and start to see, you know, because we have probably a pretty darn good idea about what some of the funding sources are gonna be to address a lot of these. And then we'll be able to see, can we cover them all? Are there some we're gonna have to timeline out further? Are there some that commission just decides and staff decides are they're more wants than needs, let's shelve this one for a little while, or this one becomes more of a priority for whatever reasons we discussed, but it becomes now a part of this budgeting process, rather than kind of, if I remember the last 2 years, the way we would go through that CIP book. I mean, God, we'd like go page by page, and some people had 8 billion questions, and some people didn't have any questions. Some were funded projects, some were unfunded projects. It kind of was, for me, it was hard to sometimes just wrap my head around all of them. And then you had questions, what is this, why is that? This will just make it a lot more organized to be able to say, well, here's the master, what are we doing about these? And we can sort of check them off. And, you know, what do you think, how do we, is this surtax gonna pay for this, what's this on that surtax list? Is this gonna be handled by an enterprise or a district fund? Are we gonna, you know, and I mean, this is just a whole lot easier to work with, if you ask me. And I know a ton of work went into it. It really did.
But back to, I forget who asked the question earlier, and Director Williams answered it. This is the ranking that our team put together. Then it was supplemented by the expertise of our external financial partner. You as a board have not sat and said, you know, I have a question about this one, or I want to know about that one. Those are the kind of questions that we would entertain and welcome during the budget process, to say, okay, we see how you got here, but just for our commission knowledge, help me understand why this project is here versus this project. And we should have a good answer for that, or be able to respond to that.
Yeah, and you make a good point. I don't really consider this a priority ranking. In my estimation, it's a comprehensive schedule of all the capital improvement projects laid out with a timeline that makes sense department by department. Look at the way, again, our process works. We meet early in the year, we do after each election cycle, and do a strategic planning. We go back over those pillars and priorities. Then, as we firm those priorities up, you know, we start to look at some of this stuff, and as they come forward, it's always just like we look at department expenses and budgeting and decide what we can and can't do from a staffing standpoint and an expense standpoint, from a higher level, not line item by line item. Also with the CIP, with the capital improvement projects, it's gonna be the same way. So there will be a prioritization, and there's public input, there's commission input. You know, last thing I want people to think is, oh, you know, staff just like got together with our outside consultants and this is it, man, this is what we need, this is what it, that isn't how this works. This is a collective input process, and this is just the beginning. And each year, just like we do with every tax dollar the citizens pay, we talk about where we're gonna spend them. How do we get our biggest bang for the buck? How do we meet the highest priorities under each pillar? And it's the same thing with these capital improvement projects and the expenses. So, thank you. I don't know, anybody got anything else? What else?
Public comment.
Well, even before that, let me ask you, are there any directions? I mean, this is not a workshop, but are there any motions needed to staff? What is staff looking for us, from us, or?
We're not looking for an emotional direction. This was to share with you the long work of not only PFM, but finance and the team, so that you know how it will connect to the budget process. I think that it's a lot of information, and again, there are guardrails and different ways that we're going to show how we're going to get there, but this is just the report that we know is valuable, because when we did it and started it, people said, why did you pick those 3 particular projects? And I think we've answered that question now as we sit up on the, near the referendum date, but now it's just a matter of, let's take it all together, now all 3 documents that they have provided should sort of talk to each other as we move forward and be in alignment with how we get the city to where we want it to be.
If I may, I'm wondering, Mayor and City Manager, if you might want a consensus. We did discuss 2 things, and that was to continue implementing the long-term capital improvement plan, expanding the planning horizon from 5 to 10 years, and also at a high-level summary, identify anticipated funding sources. Not all the potential funding sources, but from staff's best estimate, what funding sources are most likely to come into play. So if I'll take a crack.
It's why I asked the question I did, because actually, starting with the second reference, that I assume would be part of our budget process on the capital improvement side. We have the master list now, so if we look down everything that's scheduled in Fly 25-6, and we can go down them, and we can say, okay, it's scheduled for this year, or it's on the timeline, how's staff planning on paying for it?
Right.
And that's how they'll fall into their buckets.
Right.
That's why I wasn't sure if, staff was looking for direction, or if it's just, really, it's the inevitable next step. We're right into the budget process, so I don't know, if you'll wanna make a consensus, I don't know that we
I
need
think
it.
for me, it was a matter of presentation. We do that on the individual CIP sheets. But I just found this so incredibly helpful to also have a column that identifies anticipated funding sources. Really helps us at a high level get a bird's eye view of what's gonna come out of operations, what's gonna come out of surtax, what might be bonding or a
Only
COPS.
thing is, you can only do it year by year. For instance, a particular capital improvement category in the next year or 2 may be funded, say, out of, let's just argue, district funds or utility fund or a surtax. But going out 3, 4, 5 years, that same category of capital improvement may well be funded by something different. So to put them to task to try to go through this 4 pages and identify the funding categories first and second is kind of like trying to say exactly when we're gonna do each of these. It's kind of a moving target, and being asked they're up to what there should be, their eye teeth in budget preparation, as we, instead of like rolling through the book like we used to do, which was so, to me, haphazard or hard to follow, we could use this as the guideline, and as each department comes before us like they do, once we roll through the budget, we could then say, okay, let's talk about capital improvements, or come back at a second time and say, okay, here's what you all had timelined out. Where are your funding sources? And you do them year by year as part of the budget process.
Well, I have a slightly different perspective. We ought to, as a team, have an idea of how we are gonna fund these projects at least 10 years, certainly 5 years. I think it's a useless exercise 15 years out. But how can we properly manage if we don't have a view of how we're planning, maybe too strong, how we're thinking of funding these things? Because then that really helps us hone in on, when we have an exercise of identifying surtax projects, it's there. We have the projects where staff would like to tap surtax, or, this project, we generate enough in impact fees to be able to fund this project. But this other one is gonna require some borrowing or some cops, and it really
Takes time
helps
to plan
us
for it. Make some
focus
good
in on
points.
that. I
What do
mean,
you
I
think?
could be talked out of the 5 to 10 years, but certainly for 5-year projects.
What do you guys
And
think?
it could change, I'm not saying this is how we're gonna do it, but this is what we're anticipating doing.
And this is a special meeting, so you can vote on it, you don't have to have a consensus, but we understand the assignment, and we're gonna bring it back and go in that pathway with the things
Okay.
that we talked about, so we are going to be prepared to give you that information as the CIP of this year unfolds.
Okay, that's great, because I just love this view of it, and it would be great to sort of see how we're looking at the funding, rather than just having to go through individual CIP projects.
That makes sense.
Gives a bird's eye
At what point in the budget process do you see that coming to us?
I believe we meet back with you in June, if I'm not mistaken. So when we start going through the different departments, normally we have a CIP category that is included in there. It'll just be a little bit more robust this year. So we'll add on to what we have so that we make it a intentional conversation.
That'll give us a 5
Yeah.
to maybe a 10-year perspective on the buckets, the funding buckets, where you
Right.
see,
And there'll have to be some assumptions that are
Right.
made on our end before we get to you.
and that,
And then you might say, well, wait a minute, no, well, we don't want to do that or try that.
Okay.
But that's where some of those conversations will have to occur.
Well, I'm certainly comfortable if city manager sees that as a logical next step. I'm comfortable
Yeah,
with that. I
that's-
don't feel the need for a consensus.
sounds good. Anybody, any additional thoughts here? Last chance. We have any general public comments?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have one e-comment. Debbie McDowell. The project list outlines specific projects and some projects that are more general. For example, fire facilities, sidewalks, park equipment, etc. Here are some specific projects that have been in the city's CIP for at least a couple years and are missing from the project list presented for today's discussion. The Cranberry and Hillsborough intersection improvement project. This is unique since it's already designed and a 50-50 split with Charlotte County. Utilities City Water Sewer Neighborhood Expansion Project. This has already been master planned and the Blue Ridge Salford phase is already designed. While the project was completely defunded to make up Price Boulevard shortfalls, this project has been a huge priority. Welland Park Government Building and the Northport South River Road Park. I recall these are part of the post-annexation agreement. Myakahatchee Creek and Price Bridge replacement. This is in design and grants and have been applied for. It has a separate CIP seat. And then phase 2 for Price Boulevard widening. There are other missing projects from staff's list, but I'm running out of space. I'll close with this final thought. Is this list of projects etched in stone? Is it a roadmap? Is it a wish list? I only ask because the list includes an NPPD substation in the Yorkshire area for 2035. With all the discussions on the need for NPPD HQ versus substations being less efficient, maybe chief or deputy chief can weigh in during today's discussion as to why it's on the list at all. Thanks, everyone. That is all, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I guess if there's nothing else to this, it's 4:13 and I adjourn the special meeting. Thank you, everybody.
We were wonderful.
I know, right?
Priceless.
I know.
Love